talk a little bit about how narcissistic people get authenticity wrong. Let me give you some examples here. He says what he wants and doesn't care what anybody thinks or how anybody feels about it. I admire that and I want to be like that. Okay. Now that line there was something I read in an article that was shared by a younger man who was emulating an older narcissistic man whom he saw as a role model. The older man, the narcissistic man does what he wants, says what he wants, is pretty much enabled and emboldened by everyone around him, and he gets away with it. So there's very little that's ever going to stop him. The younger man admires this, and he wanted to be able to share his opinions, many of which were unkind and uncompassionate, but he didn't care. In his book, he wanted permission to be authentic. And in the old guy's book, and now he is the admirer, authenticity is basically to unapologetically do and say what you want. Now, I actually don't think that that's what authenticity is, or that's certainly not what the humanistic folks meant. But unfortunately, in a world where I am not necessarily sure that narcissism is on the rise, but in which the emboldening and the apologism and the enabling and the rebranding of narcissistic people. My recent favorite was reading something that was written about a psychopathic coercive controller. And the psychopathic person was just called complicated. Listen, you can put lipstick on a pig and you know the rest. Now, not everyone who spews hurtful, thoughtless BS is narcissistic. Some of them are just plain immature, insecure, want to stay anonymous. Some of them do want validation for being a straight-talking provocateur and all the likes and the followers they get from that and the influencer status and the goodies that come from that. It isn't clear if their unapologetic so-called straight-talking is necessarily paralleled with abusive treatment of other people behind closed doors. I don't know. I'm not behind closed doors with them. But when this mindset is in a narcissistic person, I'm going to be authentic and say what I want, and I don't give a damn what other people think about me, is when it devolves into entitlement and a harmful lack of empathy. But all of this gets reframed as authenticity, and somehow that gives it some sort of shiny coating that really unkind behavior is brave and courageous. Because when this devolves into close relationships and personal relationships, this can get very messy and perhaps even confusing. I'm actually veering away and almost stopping and no longer really use the word authenticity because it has become so twisted by folks in the narcissism world. Now, used correctly and well with that humanistic twist where it came from, to be authentic means to be true to the self, but that is predicated, that's based on knowing what or who your true self is. A lot of examination then theoretically goes into getting to an authentic place, and frankly, most authentic people do actually care what other people feel or think because they care about other people. But the word has become infected. And as I said, I avoid it because many a narcissistic person has said to me, speaking my mind is who I am. And I'm going to tell you this, folks, I'm too tired to argue. So I now tend to use words like individuation and give it a minute, and the pro-narcissism forces are going to take that word too, and I'll go find another. Now, the only position we really have in the face of all this pseudo-authenticity is discernment. If someone says, this is my truth, this is who I am, I say what is on my mind, and I don't care what anyone thinks, that doesn't mean you have to be a captive audience applauding their authenticity. Discernment means you can disengage, step back, critically listen, make a choice for yourself. If you were to say to this person, hey, I get that this is your truth, and it is hurtful for me to hear it, and you still hear, I don't care, it's my truth, that's not a red flag. That's a complete confirmation that what you are up against is some form of antagonism or narcissism. And that's when I'd recommend you start zipping up your proverbial suitcase and stepping back. You are not going to convince this person otherwise. And if you hang around too long, this person will gaslight you and characterize you as the problem because you are not comfortable with raw truth or with their raw authenticity. We are in a world where the more shameless, the more cruel, the more conspiratorial, the more outlandish, and the more dehumanizing the person behind the mic, the more money they make and the more likes they get. That doesn't make it authentic. That makes it incentivized. We are definitely at a time when we reward, financially and otherwise, people who just say what they want and don't care what people or groups of people they hurt. They get rich and the world polarizes further, which hurts all of us. If you can see it as less about authenticity and more about their attention-seeking rhetoric being rewarded, it starts to make sense. But your life is not a podcast. So when the narcissistic person in your life says or speaks in their abrupt and unempathic way, and they say that that's just them being authentic, you may even question yourself for a moment. You might say, well, I guess they are just speaking their mind and saying what's real to them. Isn't that authenticity? Not if they're not willing to listen to what's real to you. Personally, I do believe that there is a way to speak one's mind and not hurt someone else, but what I know. On a podcast or when someone is sharing opinions on social media or the like, opinions that are drastically different than our own, we can see it for the entertainment it is. If we're grossed or out or offended by it, we can turn it off. But when this is happening in our lives and hurtful words and invalidating words are flying at us from a partner, a friend, a family member, or a colleague, you do start to wonder if maybe you're the problem. Or maybe you start to wonder if you don't quite understand what authenticity is correctly. And of course, that raises a much bigger philosophical and psychological issue. Are some people authentically assholes? It's tricky. Is a person's narcissism their authentic self? Or is it what many other psychologists argue, that it's a post-traumatic state, a byproduct of an adverse childhood or an overindulged one? And does that imply that somewhere deep, deep, deep down in a psychological cavern of the narcissistic person's soul, therein lies the authentic version of themselves? Is authenticity always someone being good? And narcissism makes this conversation tricky. It may very well be, just as some people are authentically agreeable and some people are authentically conscientious, perhaps some people are authentically narcissistic or antagonistic all the way down. That they genuinely don't care if they hurt your feelings. They say what they want and they say what they believe. And that's authentic to them. Because if that's the case, if their authentic self is a person that hurts you, what does that mean? In the healthiest telling of the story, it means that recognizing that being in this relationship is always going to hurt. It's who they are. Scorpion stings. Narcissistic person hurts. Perhaps it's the natural order of things. Listen, it doesn't mean you have to get up and leave or go no contact, but it does mean that this is what it is, and it's always going to feel a little icky. If someone shows you who they are, then not only a page out of Maya Angelou, not only do you then believe them, but also recognize that it may simply be who they are. The longer I do this work, the less convinced I become that authenticity is always a good thing. I think far more important than authenticity is discernment. Because some people's authentic selves may simply not work for us or may not even be safe for us, and that's okay. But one of the key elements, if a person wants to speak their mind, speak their truth, and that's authentic to them, and even if it's completely at odds with what you believe, shouldn't that authentic person then be able to hear your reality without shooting it down, doubting it, or telling you it's wrong? Authenticity is not a one-sided street. You can have your worldview. You're going to have to hold space for another. But in the world we're in now, when folks tell me that someone's authentic or they think of themselves as authentic, I sometimes get a little bit of a cringe. Thanks again.